Hi everyone, and welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video, we're going to take what we've built in previous videos where we talked about specific workout types during cross-country general prep and really focus in on how to sequence them. Not the workouts themselves, but really how do we place them correctly to maximize them and promote proper adaptation, either yourself or if you're coaching a team. So really what we're thinking about is where should the workouts go. First part, which is most important, is how long does it take to recover from each, because you don't want to be stacking up a bunch of things that take a lot of time to recover right next to each other, because you're going to beat your athlete down and you're also not going to get the most out of those workouts. And once you've got that down, you're going to be looking at how you can kind of pair things up. So what workouts kind of, if you put them next to each other, how are they going to, they can actually add to the adaptation simply because of these similarities and actually more importantly the differences between those workouts if you're thinking about that on the next level. So most important is the recovery timetable, and then you're kind of looking at the workout types and how you can pair them up. Here's a bunch of our members of the Wharton Cross Country team after we competed at the Seffner Christian Invitational in 2016, and as you can see, all the members here was able to come up with medals in this race. This is a pretty challenging course. It's in a little town called Lakeland in the middle of Florida. Has a lot of hills and turns and things like that, so it's a really challenging course. It's typically a race that's done at the beginning of the season when you're still kind of getting used to things. So at this point of the season, you really should be able to see if you've properly adapted your athletes from things like sequencing, if they're able to stay strong all the way through the race, if you've been able to build all the adaptations we're looking at. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. If you want a closer look at my credentials, they are on the screen. Alright, so I always like to look at the race metrics, what the actual race that we're dealing with includes, and right now we're dealing with the cross country 5K. If you don't know what the specific metrics of a race are, you're kind of flying blind, knowing the energy demands, the race pace, and things like that, so it's really important to know that before you try to figure out the training for anyone getting ready for that race. So based on the study that was first published by Ingham in 2008, what they did was they looked at a bunch of different factors with a bunch of professional and semi-professional runners to figure out not just the 5K, but they looked at the 800, the 1500, and the 10K. What was it that separated those who won and those who didn't? And what they found after looking at it was very clear that there was one thing that separated people in the 5K, and it was who had the best, most developed VO2 max, who could use the most oxygen at the actual pace. Makes sense, because at such a long race, we want to be able to use as much oxygen to produce the energy with the aerobic system as possible, and they found that it was accurate, very, very close to 95% of the time, 94.3%, and in racing, that is almost as sure of a thing as you can actually get. Now, obviously, there's probably a few times when people went out too fast or there was just bad race tactics or other things involved, but they found a single variable very much indicated who was going to win this particular race. And they looked at a whole bunch of different things. Running economy, they looked at 400-meter time, they looked at body composition, leg length ratio, all these different things, and it was very clear in the 5K, this was sort of the focal point. And one of the reasons why that is, we can probably pick up from the USA Track and Field distance curriculum, where we find that the 5K, when run at race pace, okay, so that's the important thing, run at race pace, not just walking or anything, but at race pace, you're running your 5K at 97% of your VO2 max pace, so just a little bit slower than VO2 max. So because this is so close to VO2 max, that is probably why that indicator is so close to almost a sure thing, or as sure a thing as you can get in actual racing. Makes sense, because VO2 max testing, one of the best ways of testing is run 2 miles to exhaustion. 2 miles is obviously shorter than a 5K, so it would make sense for when run correctly, it would be a little bit slower but pretty close. And then when we look at the energy demands, a groundbreaking study that was first produced by Dr. Matter and Dr. Hartman in 2018, they work very closely with the IAAF, which also looks at various types of athletic events, and when they looked at the 5K, they found that 4% of the energy was being contributed from the ATP available in the muscles and the phosphocreatine, or collectively called the alactic system. You've got the anaerobic glycolytic system, which we're not dealing with at all during general prep, because this system preps in about 9 to 11 weeks, half the amount of time as the aerobic system, so We're not dealing with sequencing these workouts at all, but when we get to specific prep in later videos, we certainly will. So we're not worrying about that system at all. It contributes 10% of the energy system. And we're not worried about that energy system right now, okay? And then the aerobic system, 86% of the energy, no shocker there, obviously, with it being such a long race, and it being so tied to VO2 max, it's going to be contributing the lion's share of the energy. So basically, when we are looking at sequencing workouts during general prep, we're dealing mostly with the aerobic system, and then specifically the ATP, phosphocreatine, or the alactic system, this 4%. We're also dealing with this in some specific strength runs, but on any day that we're doing this, we're also going to be targeting the aerobic system in a different way, because obviously 86 to 4, if we get this right, we can get to about 90% of the energy contributions during general prep, and then when the time is right, we can start working on the anaerobic glycolytic system. So also, the law of training specificity, this is really important to always keep in mind when you are training yourself or somebody else. Just training them doesn't mean you're doing yourself or whoever you're training a favor. The law of training specificity basically says every training session you do, any practice session, conditioning, whatever, has a very specific effect on the athlete. That means that you do workout A, effect A eventually happens in the athlete from adaptation. You do workout B, then it's going to create effect B or adaptation B in the athlete. You do workout A, you're not necessarily going to get outcome B or training effect B unless it's very similar, if not the exact same workout. The idea being is the specific training has a very specific effect on the athlete, which may or may not be desired for the event. So that's why we look here at the 5K, all the things that make up the metrics of it. And what we really want to think about when looking at the metrics and the law of training specificity here is, what's the best way to sequence workouts to promote proper adaptation for success in the cross-country 5K? In previous videos, we talked about each of these workout types. I'll throw them all in the description down below, as well as just planning out your macro cycle and your general prep, as well as a couple other things like strength workouts I'll throw down in the description too. We're just trying to figure out how can we best put these in place in your microcycles, or at this time of the year, probably a week-long training plan that kind of stack up on each other overall throughout general prep, typically thought of as your summer training season for a cross-country 5K. All right, so there are 4 main things that we want to kind of really develop in general prep cross-country training. And the first one is called central VO2 max improvement. So you hear VO2 max, there are 2 aspects of it, 2 ways you can improve it. And here's the first one. This is what we probably think about mostly, central VO2 max. It's improved with general aerobic work done for at least 20 continuous minutes. We've talked about this in previous videos. After 20 minutes at any type of continuous pace, it can be aerobic threshold, it can be lactic threshold, it can be done with intervals by having an active recovery. After 20 continuous minutes, your body releases a bunch of different hormones, does a bunch of different things that creates a lot of the aerobic properties we want. Bigger heart, more capillaries, enzymes, mitochondria development. That's that idea of 20 continuous minutes. So that's central VO2 max improvement. It's typically thought of as aerobic threshold. Again, those are your easy pace workouts, which are commonly tied to long and recovery runs. But as I mentioned, you can also get central VO2 max from things we're going to talk about later, like peripheral VO2 max with intervals, with tempo running. As long as your heart rate isn't dropping below 120 for more than about 30 to 60 seconds, you're getting this 20 continuous or near continuous development of central VO2 max. So why is it called central VO2 max? It's because it generally improves as the body increases the ability to move oxygen from the heart outward. So the heart is the center part. We're trying to figure out how we can get as much oxygen from the center outward. Okay, this is really the choke point. Humans do not store oxygen for a couple of good reasons. One, hopefully we're never without oxygen for more than a minute or 2, but also oxygen is very corrosive, and if we did store it, we would not live for very long because it is so corrosive, or we would have to develop it in a very different way to neutralize all of those free radicals that acid can actually produce because it's so corrosive. So generally, that's the choke point, because under normal conditions, not training, not trying to be the fastest aerobic runner you can be, your body's only going to want to use so much oxygen. We're trying to increase that, and one way you do it is you get like a bigger left ventricle of the heart so it can pump more blood that has oxygen. You produce more blood, have more blood vessels, specifically capillaries to the working muscles so they can get more oxygen, have more mitochondria and enzymes to produce it. Lots of different things that happen, and that's generally from increasing this aspect of VO2 max called central VO2 max. But there's one other aspect of it, which is called peripheral VO2 max, and it's just like what it sounds like. The central VO2 max takes care of moving oxygen from the center. Peripheral is dealing with oxygen at the periphery, or at the working muscles, away from the heart or the center of the body. So this is generally trained with, or only trained with, aerobic power work only, okay, done at 98 to 101% current VO2 max. We've talked about this in VO2 max testing and VO2 max intervals in the description down below. Aerobic power, I'll interchange that with VO2 max workouts. Aerobic power is 98 to 101%, VO2 max is 100%. So it's kind of one of those things, if it's VO2 max, it's aerobic power, and if it's aerobic power, it's pretty much almost VO2 max. This is commonly tied with VO2 max intervals or VO2 max tests, as I just said. Probably, again, a more proper term is aerobic power because it is that bigger approach, but it's generally said as the same thing. And it generally improves as the body increases the ability of the working muscles to extract oxygen from blood for use in the mitochondria. So right up here, it's all about moving oxygen from the heart outward, but it's actually more important down here that the working muscles can actually get it. So we move as much oxygen as we can with central VO2 max development, and then with peripheral VO2 max development, we're able to pull the oxygen off the blood. Your body develops something called myoglobin in the working muscles that takes the oxygen off the blood, and then your muscles can actually use it. So that's the real important thing. Myoglobin development from peripheral VO2 max from aerobic power workouts. Also, the mitochondria that you actually have developed with central VO2 max also get bigger when they're being trained this way, so that's another training effective. So those are two of the things we want in general prep. And the other one is running economy, and the pace here is going to vary with athletes and training. I'll talk about that in a second, but running economy, it's any general aerobic work, so this can be trained with aerobic threshold, but it's best done at lactic threshold, 85% current VO2 max, most commonly tied with the tempo run. A lot of coaches know what a tempo run. Basically, it improves as the body uses the least amount of energy to move. That's what economy means. How can we get from point A to point B with the least amount of energy? Running economy is how you improve it. And it includes several aspects such as fuel storage, storing more fuels, putting it closer to working muscles, and muscle elasticity is part of it too. So this is something we definitely want to develop during general prep too. Again, this can be developed with just aerobic threshold running, but lactic threshold running does it a little bit better. 85% has this asterisk of varying with athletes training because your body needs to be able to, with the aerobic system, offset the increased development or increased use from the anaerobic glycolytic system, so that your body is able to offset the hydrogen ion atoms or hydrogen ion atoms that can be bouncing around. And if you have somebody that's not trained, maybe it's their first month running, they're not going to be able to get to this point, so it's going to be closer to an aerobic threshold. But that's kind of generally thought of. A trained person is about 85%. And the last thing we want to really train during general prep is specific strength. And there's two key workouts that you're going to do with this. You've got hill runs, typically short intervals, and this is going to improve muscle elasticity, so this is also going to help with running economy, and force production. That, you know, at the end of the race when you've got, you know, a group of 5 or 6 people and 1 or 2 of them pull away, force production is why that person does a little bit better at the end. And then alactic runs, typically as fly 30s to improve muscle coordination and synchronization. It also helps with force production. I should have also put muscle elasticity. Both of these do that. So it's not only going to help you with that final push, but it is going to help you with muscle elasticity. So these are the 4 main components that we are trying to train: central VO2 max, peripheral VO2 max, running economy, and specific strength in general prep with these various workouts that we've kind of talked about in here. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can sequence them. All right, we're not going to go over what makes all these workouts what they are during general prep, but I just want to refresh everyone's memory on what actually is included. If you want a detailed description on all of these types, there's videos in the description down below. But this is also going to look at the timetables for recovery for each of these ones. So there's going to be 3 main groups here. So the ones that take 48 hours to recover from, okay, so these are your more intense ones during general prep. VO2 max intervals, and I say out to 6,400 meters, okay? If you do more than that, then you're probably then it falls into a different type. So out to 6,400 meters, or basically 4 times mile repeat. And the reason for this is acid and fuel source is why this takes longer than just a day to recover from. You're going to be developing acid at VO2 max pace. It's higher than lactic threshold, so your body is going to be accumulating acid. So that's one of the things, but you're also using a lot of fuel source, the stored carbohydrates or glycogen at this, as well as with VO2 max test. There's less total volume in a VO2 max test, typically 2 miles, but because it's together, you're going to increase the acid levels and all those things, and also fuel source. I will say that a VO2 max test probably is easier to recover from than if you're doing like 4 times mile repeats, that is for sure, but both require 48 hours to recover from. Moderate distance races. So during general prep, you might have kids do a 4th of July, maybe not this year because of everything that's going on in the world with the coronavirus, but there's typically 4th of July 5Ks or just fun runs and things like that. And a lot of times you might want to use that even as like a test of how people are. That's perfectly fine. If you have moderate distance races, and basically what I'm saying is no longer than like say 5K, okay? Those moderate type distance races are going to do the same thing as a VO2 max test or intervals. You're going to have acid development and fuel source, so that also requires 48 hours of recovery. Moderate tempo runs, so basically fitting within the categories we've talked about before, 20 to about 35, maybe 40 minutes at your lactic threshold pace, so that 85% VO2 max for most people. And it's not an acid thing with moderate tempos, it's simply you're burning, this workout burns the most glycogen or stored glucose, which is fast fuel, and the human body can only store about 2 hours worth of it. You can, what I call backdoor this with something more intense, so you can do a VO2 max run and then a moderate tempo. I would say moderate tempos are probably more like 36 to 40 hours recovery if they're in that realm of, like I said, moderate. You probably don't need to do that during general prep. I talked about this in the video down below on tempo running. You probably will need to do this later on in the year with specific prep training because you get more workout types. There's really no reason to do it in general prep to get more quality in your actual week because there's just not enough workouts to mess around with, essentially, but you could if you needed to for whatever reason. Long run plus, okay? So we talked about with long runs, you want to aim for 20 to 22% of weekly volume. If for some reason you're training somebody and they say, hey coach, you told me to run 8 miles today, but I was feeling good, so I went 12 miles, and you're like, oh man. The reason being is now they've gone out for so much longer, they've done the same thing as a moderate tempo, they've just burned so much of their stored glucose, okay? So as long as you're in the 20 to 22% weekly volume, that's not what this is. This is a long run that goes out further than 20 to 22% of your weekly volume. As well as, if you have a long or a recovery run plus for a different reason, if you end up going faster than 40% VO2 max. So easy pace aerobic threshold is typically 65 to 70%. If for some reason you come back and you see that your athlete or yourself decided that they'd lost their mind and they decided to run 78% or something like that, closer to tempo pace, and you see that their heart rate is way over 150, they've done the same thing. They've had to use that stored glucose because the faster pace, you have to use that more readily available fuel source to fuel the energy recharging on those days. So basically, this is a design. This design workout is 48 hours. The first 3 that have to do with VO2 max and moderate tempo are designed 48. Long runs and long runs plus or and recovery runs plus for being too fast. Those are kind of because the workout didn't go the way you wanted. There was something that went wrong with them. So you would never really do this intentionally. It's just if something went wrong. Now we've got 24-hour recovery. So essentially what, let me get them all off the screen first actually. Regular long runs, 20 to 22% at VO2 max, 24 hours recovery. You can do anything the next day. Recovery runs, I typically think of it as between 30 and 60 minutes. My favorite distance for recovery runs is 45 minutes, typically about 6 miles with your high school boys. At 65 to 70% VO2 max, you can do anything the next day. Short hill intervals, description down below. I haven't really talked about it all that much in this video. 24-hour recovery, you can come back and do anything the next day. Alactic runs, fly 30s. If you do them correctly, if they're not braking too quickly or doing it or holding pace for too long or something, and I mentioned this all in the video about alactic running in the description down below, you can come back the next day and do anything. Okay, so get that off the screen. Any of these workouts you have to follow with a 24-hour. So you do a VO2 max interval, you have to follow with a recovery run. You do a VO2 max test, you have to follow with an alactic run. Moderate distance race, you can come back with a recovery run or a long run. Moderate tempo, like I said, you could potentially do one of these and then go to it if you need to. I would not during general prep, but you could. Moderate tempo, come back with something in these 24 hours. Or if you do one of these things and you have to reset, a 48-hour recovery workout has to be followed by a 24-hour recovery workout. Now, can you do 24-hour recovery ones back-to-back? Absolutely. And in that fictitious macrocycle that we talked about in the general preparation phase video down below, you'll see that happens all the time. I'll take you guys through a microcycle that does that. It's just that if you do a 48-hour, because of either the acid and the fuel or just the fuel source, you have to do one of these other things that trains the body in a different way than developing acid or draining fuel source. Long run, recovery run, short hill run, and alactic all tag the central nervous system. These ones also stress the muscles a little bit more, and these ones are just kind of mentally draining too, because the long run can get a bit long, but they're nothing that lasts longer than 24 hours. Now, more intense. I would say that I would never intentionally schedule a 72-hour recovery workout during general prep. You might have a situation where you have somebody that you're trying to push a particular way or whatever. You might do this later in the season. I even wouldn't do this. I never want to fall into the 72-hour recovery. You're just giving up too much. If you have to follow a 72-hour recovery workout, especially later in the year when you have races and things like that to get involved with, you're giving up so many days that you can do, one of these followed by, like, say it's specific prep. You could do a VO2 max interval, a tempo run, and then come back with a long run. That's a good 3-day stretch. You do this, and now you have to do long run, recovery run. You've kind of lost something there. And as you see, nothing here is very different from 48 hours. It's just basically a lot of these things getting out of hand. So if you do VO2 max intervals, you can do them out to 9,600 meters. Okay, you can for a high school kid who's been running for a while. Okay. But you are going to be developing a ton of acid and zapping fuel sources. So to me, it just doesn't make sense unless for some reason you were just trying to supercharge somebody's VO2 max. Like they've already got, central VO2 max, running economy, and specific strength, but you have to charge their peripheral VO2 max. You could do this if you just felt you needed to get those extra, 2 miles worth of peripheral VO2 max development in a week. I've never gotten to that point, but there's potentially a reason why you could. Maybe you have somebody that decides, I'm going to run a 10K, and they're not just doing it for fun. I'm not saying just running it basically as a long run. I'm talking about you go out and race a 10K or a 15K or something like that. They need 2 days after that of easy stuff, again, because of the acid and the fuel. If you decide that you just really have to improve somebody's running economy, and you're like, I need long tempo runs, I would say beyond 35 to 40 minutes. I never go beyond 35 minutes with high school kids, even the best of them, because you're getting a lot of running economy development with just your central VO2 max development. Also, just running miles improves running economy, as well as if you're doing your short hills and your alactic runs often. But if you just felt that you absolutely needed to go out beyond it and go, we're going to go 7 miles of tempo, which is something that I did maybe 5-6 years ago before I really understood the long-term effects of it. You could, but man, you are draining so much glycogen, you're going to have to, again, do the same thing. So as you can see, there's nothing in the 72-hour that's not out here. It's basically just when these things, I don't want to say get out of hand, but it's these things plus, essentially. So, correctly managing, and this is really the most important point, okay? So this sequencing of go 48 hours to a 24, if you needed to maybe do the moderate tempo as a backdoor and then do the 24, or if something gets out of hand and you need 72 hours, that whole idea of correctly managing this sequencing of workouts, that is far more important, okay? Getting this part right, what's on the screen right now, the 48-hour, 24-hour, potentially 72-hour recovery, and how you sequence these things, getting that right is far more important than any one workout could ever be, okay? How these things pair up, what you're doing day to day with yourself or your training, that's way more important. I'd rather get sequencing right and not know how to correctly manage a VO2 max interval or something like that. It's probably not what we think about first. We think about the workout of that day. It's the sequencing. How does everything line up? That's really where you're going to have the bigger effect. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, please take that away. Properly sequencing and managing the workouts in this way is the most important thing to take from it, okay? It allows for proper adaptation for the athlete to never feel like they are just surviving the microcycle, okay? You ever heard kids that'll say that they're just getting pounded away with, multiple tempo runs a week, or just so much VO2 max work, or they're not getting a lot of recovery at all on any of these days, and they feel like they're just surviving to get to their race. You never want your kids to be in that situation, or yourself to be in that situation. If you manage this right, you will get the improvements you want, and you will get that in a way where you're not being overtrained in any way and feel that kind of chronic fatigue that can happen to a lot of people at the end of their season. Okay, that last screen that we talked about was what we said was the most important focus of this presentation, the sequencing of the workouts, that 48, 24-hour rule, and it definitely is. But once you have that down, you can also start to figure out how can you pair up workouts to where you can maximize their benefit for whoever it is you're training. And the way that you do that is with thinking altering energy system focus. Not by what I think a lot of people get in mind. It's not hard day followed by easy day. If you do hard day followed by easy day, well then half your workouts are easy, right? That's not really what we want to think about here. We want to think about how can we alter the energy system focus. And if you think about that screen that we just looked at, I mean, fly 30s and short hill intervals are pretty intense. They're basically as fast as you can go for the distance. So it's not that those workouts aren't hard or intense, it's just that they're training something very different than, say, aerobic threshold long run. Okay, and those are two things that you would want to kind of pair up if you could. Now, you probably wouldn't want to put fly 30s on the day before hill runs. And we talk about that in the video description down below on both short hill intervals and alactic running. You want to kind of separate those by a little bit. I mean, there'd be nothing necessarily wrong with it, but if you want to take it to that next level, you need to think altering energy systems. When I'm training central VO2 max one day, the alactic system is resting, and when I come back and I train alactic, you know, maybe something else is resting. So think about it that way. Think about altering energy system focus. Don't think hard day followed by easy day, okay? So with that in mind, it's great to do one of the strength runs, any of those, and I just mentioned this, short hills or alactic, the day after a long run or a recovery run. Why is that? Totally different demand. So you go out, and you can do it the other way too. You can go flip that order and have the short hill runs the day after a long run. Or the day before, excuse me. That's perfectly fine too. I just think they get a little more out of it. The idea of, all right, we just went out and say it's the middle of July and you've run for 90 minutes. Maybe your top end boys went 12 miles and you say, all right, guys, we're coming back the next day and we're going to run 30 meters as fast as we can. You can't get more different than those two things. You are totally charging one energy system, letting it rest, and the next day you are totally charging the exact opposite. That really wasn't, I mean, all the energy demands are always on all the time, but where are you focusing on them? So that, to me, is the sweet spot, is can we go long run, you know, the day before these super fast short hill intervals or alactic. It's a great way to shift the focus from long and easy day to something short and fast. Recovery run can happen the day before too. That's absolutely fine. I just like the idea of long and the longest run that we can actually do at the slowest pace that we would do with getting a training effect. And now we've got, and I really like to do it with long run, alactic run, to the shortest, fastest possible energy system. Really mix up that energy system focus if you can make it happen. Another thing that you can do is long and recovery run and strength runs need only 24 hours of recovery. So to kind of highlight what we just talked about, this means that during general prep it's really easy to do what I just said, right? They pair them up consecutive days. It doesn't matter because we only have like 5 or so different workout types that we're even dealing with during general prep. It does mean, and this is sort of a cue for later on in the year when we talk about sequencing workouts, later on in the year you may not be able to do this all the time. General prep, I always do it. It's always the day after a long run, you got to get short hill intervals, you've got to get alactic in there. It's so easy to do, you might as well do it every single time. Specific prep pre-comp, it's going to be harder to do because 24-hour recovery workouts you want to have, you know, after something a little bit more intense, and you just, with races and things like that, it gets harder to do it. So you need to use things like this to transition from harder work. There's more harder type work. When I say harder, more intense, you've got glycolytic work and things like that. So it becomes harder to do this, what I just mentioned with the long run being backdoored by short hills or alactic in specific prep and pre-comp. You don't do hills or alactic in the competitive phase, so that doesn't matter, but just understand, try and get it done now in general prep. Mix these things up as much as you can. And as I just said, strength runs, they don't happen in the competition phase, so it doesn't matter. So during this part of the year, when you can do this and get a little more out of it, I would definitely recommend doing it during, at this point, your summer training. Also, this is sort of, that first one I said I think is most important. Here we've got, it's also a good idea to do the long run the day after a VO2 max run during general prep, if you can make it happen. So if you can go VO2 max, long run, short hills, or alactic, that's great if you can do it. It doesn't always work out. Just a lot of times we try and do, at least for my situation, you can do it however you want, we try and travel a little bit for our longer run so it doesn't get so boring, just because it is so much work in the same place. So sometimes we save that for the weekends in the summer, just to try and get, you know, more help from parents and things like that to drive if we can. So it doesn't always work out. In fact, the hypothetical microcycles I'm going to show you don't have this happen. I actually find that I find this is actually easier to do during specific prep, because VO2 max might be on a Wednesday. You can come back to a long run on Thursday, and then you can race on Saturday, and there's no problem. Or you can do this on Monday, follow this with Tuesday, and it works out really nicely. So it's easier for me to get this done in, I find, specific prep and pre-comp than it is in general prep, just because of our particular situation. But if you can make it work, you can add this to your arsenal too. So it helps the body recover and loosen up from the acid produced the day before. We said VO2 max goes out and it really can produce a lot of acid. That extra work of the long run just kind of helps loosen everybody up and get anything out that may have lingered from that acid producing VO2 max run. Recovery runs can also help too. Typically that's what I'll do a lot of times at this point in the year. I find that little bit of extra volume helps them bounce back from the VO2 max runs, especially when you're first starting to introduce them during general prep. Okay, so let's look at two examples of microcycles. One from, say, the second week of June, and one from, say, the second week of July. And this is from that fictitious general prep macrocycle, a general prep calendar that we broke down in the video descriptions down below where we put everything in. So this is one second week of June, second week of July, and we'll see how you would do this. So this is our, say, mid-June, so this would be basically like next week when this video posts. Here's what you would want to do. Plan the 48-hour recovery workouts first. Put those in first, okay? Then you can figure out the 24-hour recovery ones afterwards. So we want to make sure that we get a VO2 max run. So we say on day 2 of this mid-June microcycle, we'll have a VO2 max test, 2 miles, 2 miles afterwards, okay. And what else takes 48 hours to recover from in a typical week in general prep? Tempo run. Okay, there we go. 2 days afterwards. So we're obviously going to have a 24-hour recovery in between. So on day 2 and day 4, we've taken care of our 48-hour recoveries. You would also, if this was later on in the year, you would put the races probably in first and then do this and then kind of work everything. This is how I kind of do it when I look at a week. I usually look at an actual calendar. That's not actually working for this actual presentation. And I put those things in first, and then I circle back through and I do the 24-hour recoveries. And then if you saw the video that I just posted a couple days ago on strength workouts, I put those in last. So we've taken care of the 48 hours. Now let's go through and put in the 24. We'll go recovery run on day 1 of this mid-June week. Put another recovery run in there. Again, as I said, it's hard, I find, sometimes to get the long run in after a VO2 max workout in general prep. We'll put another recovery run in there after the tempo. We'll put the long run in right there, and then to kind of practice what we preach, we'll put the short hill intervals right there after the long run. If you look at it, all those things follow the rule of the 48-hour, 24-hour rule. You could say, well, why wouldn't you maybe go long run here, and then maybe flip the long run in the recovery run, and then put the short hills here? You absolutely could. This would be maybe the second or third week they've been training. I'm kind of trying to separate these things from short hill intervals or 24-hour recovery, but I want to kind of ease them into that too. So that's why I kind of spread all of these things out the way I did. But you certainly could. You could put the tempo run here, and you could move the long run up here, and then do the short hill intervals right after the long run. Perfectly fine. I'm doing it that way. I think when I took this the very next week, I was doing intervals, VO2 max the very next week, early the next week. So I was trying to separate things like the tempo runs as much as I could as I was introducing that to them. So certainly those can be played around with. This is not the only way you can do it, but you can see this definitely does follow the 48, 24-hour rule, most important thing. And it gets one of those two things about mixing up workouts to kind of pair them up to get the most out of them. And this sort of does too. We've got a recovery run after here, so that actually does follow in part what we were dealing with. And it's a little bit longer than these other recovery runs we had this week too. Total miles that week would have been 40. Now let's do the same thing mid-July, so they're going to be much more in shape, so the total volume is going to be higher, but the principles are still the same. So let's go and put the 48-hour ones in first. VO2 max intervals, I kept it on day 2 of this week. We'll have 5 times 1200s at that point, almost 4 miles, almost at that top end range of 6,400 meters. And we'll put the tempo run. Let's separate those out. as much as we can now that we're used to things like short hill intervals and alactic that'll kind of pair up in the middle there. So now I'm not so worried about that. They're used to doing intervals. They're used to doing tempo runs. We've gone from 20 to 25 minutes out to 25 to 30 minutes. I'm not going over 40 with most high school kids, so we've got the two 48 hours in there, and let's go ahead and put the 24 in. We've got another recovery run on day one, nothing too crazy before those hard intervals. Recovery run afterwards, again, not perfect, but it still follows that rule of having a recovery run at least after VO2 max. Now I've got the long run there. Again, you could say flip the long run and then do what you're doing afterwards, because we know this is either going to be short hills or alactic, and it's going to be alactic at this point. And you absolutely could. I think at this point, I think this is the first time, if I remember, that we moved up to 1200. So again, I was trying to just give them a lot of easy stuff in between. Before we did the fly 30s, I want to make sure those fly 30s are good and on point. So I gave them just a little bit more time. That's just knowing your group. You may have kids that alactic does nothing to. My kids are mostly pure distance runners, so the alactic runs, I want to make sure they're good. We do them only so many times a year, so I want to make sure they're on point. So that's something else that I'm accounting for here. But you certainly could. You could go VO2 max, long run, fly 30s, and then a recovery run, and then do the tempo run on day 6 and then another recovery run, or you could get a hill run in there too if you wanted to. I think this might have been during a time frame when we said that we were not doing hills for a couple weeks. Description down below on short hill intervals where you want to kind of block them out. So this is not the only way you could do it. You could adjust this in a perfect world to do a few more other things, but it gets most of what we're dealing with in terms of sequence. We'll get to everything in terms of the 48, 24-hour rule, that's for sure. And it gets long run followed by alactic run, and it sort of kind of does the light version of get a recovery run the day after VO2 max to get all that lingering stuff out of there. This week they would be at 55 minutes total. 55 miles, excuse me, total. So that's how it all kind of works out in terms of an actual 2 microcycles. As you can see, the principles are the same. The volume has gone up by 15 miles, but the principles of how it happens the same. The volume on these days, obviously, this is almost twice what's going on here. Here's an extra mile on this, but the principles are the same of how you sequence them. And if you've gone from mid-June to mid-July, the volume isn't the issue. Again, it's just the idea of sequencing the workouts in their proper order. All right, so wrapping up this presentation, some key points. Again, I blew through what the actual workouts were because each of them have their video in the description down below that I would look at first. This is really just sequencing them all together, so it's a little bit of a shorter video, but as I said, no less important. This stuff is more important than any one workout you're doing, so if you have any questions on this, please ask them in the description down below, but here's sort of the key points from the presentation. Certain workouts, because of fatiguing factor, we talked about acid and fuel source, take longer to recover from than others. Acid accumulation and massive fuel use require this extra time. Use workouts that take just 24 hours to recovery as a transition between these more intense days, okay? So that idea of takes longer to recover from acid and fuel storage, give them something that's totally different and fatigues the central nervous system or the muscles and things like that on those other days, so we can develop those 4 key factors: central VO2 max, peripheral VO2 max, running economy, and specific strength during general prep. So that's the most important thing to take away from this, is that 48, 24-hour rule. Get away from thinking hard day, easy day. Sequencing, that's not the way to look at it. Focus on different energy systems is the second thing we're talking about, so that you can go long run, hill run, so you can go VO2 max and then long run or something like that. So focus on those different energy systems is a better way to maximize adaptation following certain, allowing certain systems to rest while others are being stressed. So this is the most important thing, the sequencing. This is the second most important thing, is how can you maximize it once you have sequenced them. In general prep, this is very simple to do these 2 things. There's nothing challenging here, really. If done right, most workouts require only 24 hours of recovery. You don't do more than 1 tempo run a week. You don't do more than 1 VO2 max workout a week. So this is pretty easy, as you saw. That didn't take a lot of brain power or stress to make happen during general prep. Now that you have this skill of doing it, later on when you have more of these 48-hour recovery workouts, i.e. those anaerobic glycolytic workouts, you'll be able to more effectively sequence them. Watch out for pushing the pace or going too long on aerobic threshold days, your long runs and your recovery runs, as this can take a 24-hour recovery timetable and make it 48 hours or longer. And you may even want that. There might be a week that you just know the volume is low, so you're going to go longer on your long runs, but you know the next day is a recovery run or something that's 24 hours. You can get away with that. Just make sure that that's on point once you get to specific prep, and especially pre-comp. Good sequencing, again, I said take this away if nothing else from this presentation. Good sequencing of workouts, the 48-24 rule, is more important than any workout. Any one workout cannot trump the idea of sequencing them together correctly, okay? Athletes will be able to make the most of each session if this is done. They won't just be surviving the week, they'll be adapting properly each week, but you'll start off and, especially with those new kids, if you get new ones in and they're like, I've never run more than a mile or two continuously, and by the end, it's never the workout that's the issue because they've been able to actually adapt to each thing, and you're stressing those different energy systems, you get that proper adaptation. You get happy athletes, you get strong athletes, you get fast athletes in the long run, and it really comes from this good sequencing, focusing on that 48-24 hour rule, and then when you can, doing that, training different energy systems with that pairing and the sequencing if you can make it happen. So a little bit of a shorter video than normal. This one's under an hour, thankfully. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do have any questions still, because it was a little bit quicker than normal, please ask them in the description down below. Again, there's a lot of videos in the description down below that I kind of reference in this one, so I would really recommend looking at those. I'm going to be doing a video next on just kind of summarizing aerobic paces, things like VO2 max, aerobic power, tempo running, or lactic threshold running, all those different things, aerobic pacing that you do during general prep, just as sort of like a summary or a light version of some of those other things that we've talked about previously. And then we're going to start looking at specific prep. Nobody probably in the country is actually going to be doing specific prep training yet, but to get ahead of it, we'll definitely look at what specific prep does, the timetable, the workout types it includes, and the first workout type we'll look at is medium hill intervals, which actually does start at the very end of general prep. So definitely want to get to that so that if you've been looking at that, anybody, you'll be able to know exactly how that workout all works and why you would place it as that transition. So if you like this video, please give it a like. If you are finding these videos helpful, please hit that subscribe button. It definitely helps the channel appear in other people's feeds if they're searching for things that are similar to what we talk about. We do about 3 to 5 videos on different aspects of, we focus a lot on especially distance running this time of year, but during the track season, as you'll see in the channel, we do other event areas too. If you find this helpful, maybe share it around with some other people that you think might also find it helpful. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.